In the United States last year, a whopping 12 billion tons of cargo were hauled by the hardworking trucking industry. Skilled drivers, equipped with CB radios, headphones, and comfy sleeper cabs, navigated the vast network of paved roads with ease thanks to power steering. Along their journeys, truckers made pit stops at truck stations offering nourishing meals, refreshing showers, and refueling services to keep them on the road. One of the most underappreciated yet vital roles during the time of Western expansion was the transportation of freight. This essential service ensured that everything from provisions to machinery, household necessities, and crucial equipment reached ranchers, miners, farmers, households, and shopkeepers. Strangely, those known as mule skinners or bull whackers often found themselves at the bottom rung of recognition in tales of the Old West, and even in their own time, they were often disregarded. In this video, we will offer a glimpse into the world of early freight handling, a time predating the use of wheeled vehicles, while the employment of steamboats on navigable waterways in the West and the steady expansion of railroads from the 1840s well into the later part of the century played a significant role in the freight industry. These methods primarily serviced cities and larger towns, requiring further transport once offloaded. This video will specifically focus on heavy-duty freight wagons. We won't be discussing lightweight express wagons, farm wagons, prairie schooners, Conestoga wagons typically used along the trails leading west, military supply or escort wagons, and stagecoaches. But before we delve into that, please subscribe our channel American Old West Tales, as it will help us a lot. Sometimes, the landscape doesn't change all that much over time. Just like today, in the early days, you could find both big freight companies and plenty of independent operators striving to make a living by moving goods. Out in the western states, some of the prominent companies included the Miller Brothers Freight Company in Arizona, Charles T. Hayden's Freight Company, which had an extensive coverage area, Russell, Majors, and Waddell, although they began in the Great Plains, eventually expanded their operations to transport goods throughout the West, mainly via Santa Fe. Idaho was served by Ketchum's Fast Freight Line, reaching most places in the state. Frank Shaw ran a significant freight operation that provided supplies to many towns and mines in eastern California and western Nevada. They even hauled the first 20-mule team borax wagon load out of Death Valley. In the late 1860s, Remy Nadeau, known as the king of the desert freighters, and Mortimer Belshaw, a part owner of the renowned Cerro Gordo silver mine, joined forces to operate the famed Cerro Gordo Freight Company. This company served most of California and extended into New Mexico. During the California Gold Rush, many mining camps were so remote and challenging to reach that packed trains of mules were used to transport supplies. Much of this was managed by individual operators. However, by the mid-1850s, some trails became suitable for wagon use. Phineas Banning and David Alexander seized this opportunity, forming a freight company that supplied numerous camps. They maintained a substantial livestock of over 500 mules and horses, which could be harnessed to 40 or more wagons. In Colorado, especially in the prosperous San Juan mining district, John Ashenfelter operated a substantial pack train and freighting company that kept the towns and mining camps supplied. Alongside Dave Wood, he ranked as one of the leading freighters serving the towns and mining districts of southwestern Colorado. These are just a few examples of the larger freight companies. On a smaller scale, there were independent teamsters who often worked alone, taking on contracts that the bigger outfits found too small, dangerous, or remote to bother with. Depending on the animals they worked with, the individuals driving the freight wagons were known as mule skinners or bull whackers. Of course, the mules weren't skinned, but the bull whackers did carry long whips to encourage the oxen along. Typically, these drivers were solitary individuals, and they might go for days without encountering another human, a bath, decent food, or essential supplies. They often slept outdoors or beneath the wagons, and in many cases, especially with the ore wagons, there was no seating provided. Consequently, the freighters would ride on the last animal harnessed or yoked. Some wagons did have wooden bench seats, but many men preferred walking since it was gentler on their bodies than the jolting ride in the wagon. There were frequently no way stations, pull-offs, or safe places to seek shelter. Up until around the mid-1880s, the presence of hostile Indians posed a real threat, as they were more than willing to attack a lone freight wagon and make off with the animals and goods. These teamsters typically traveled light, carrying only a hat, knife, rifle, and the clothes on their backs, including sturdy boots. A rough and ready bunch known for their colorful language and lack of social etiquette. Their workdays began early and ended late, encompassing the care of their animals and their own sustenance. John Bratt, a bull whacker, mentioned that he only knew one who didn't chew tobacco, swear, or drink. Their nomadic life on the trail, combined with their vices, meant that most of these teamsters were single. When they did have free time, it was often spent on liquor, gambling, and visits to brothels. With monthly pay ranging from about $70 to $80 for an experienced hand, they earned more than common laborers or miners, who generally received between $2 and $3.50 per day. To put this into perspective, before the Civil War, soldiers, privates, stationed in the West earned no more than $15 a month. Typically, the cost to transport freight ranged from $8 to $10 for every 100 pounds, but this price depended on factors like distance, hazards, and complexity. Large companies with numerous teams on the road could earn substantial profits. For instance, Russell, Majors, and Waddell wagons once made $300,000 on a single journey while delivering supplies to the Army. The Earp brothers frequently found work in the freight industry, alternating between roles as swampers, assistants who usually aided in loading and unloading, and drivers. In towns of a certain size, there were designated areas where freighters could address their needs, such as horseshoeing and repairs. However, on remote, isolated stretches, the swamper and driver often had to manage these tasks themselves. Fortunately, the wagons were so meticulously and robustly constructed that serious breakdowns were infrequent. Unquestionably, the most critical aspect of the trade was the choice of draft animals. Oxen, mules, and horses were all harnessed for this demanding work, each offering its unique advantages and disadvantages. Oxen were the economical choice, typically purchased for around $65 per pair in the mid-1880s. They could pull substantial loads and required less water and feed, often grazing off the land. However, they were notably slower than horses and mules, with an average travel speed of about 2 miles per hour, which was only half to 2/3 the speed of a horse or mule. Usually, robust steers with horns were preferred for use as oxen, with Texas Longhorns or large Durhams frequently selected. The choice of stock was a matter of great care and experienced judgment, not only because of the cost, but also due to the safety and livelihood of the bullwhacker, which often depended on it. Horses and mules were expected to pull their own weight, hence the origin of the phrase. A large mule or horse was typically considered capable of pulling 1 ton. The loading of wagons was determined based on the number of horses or mules needed. A substantial mule could haul more than 1 ton and more than an average-sized horse. However, mules and horses were more expensive than oxen, with a pair of mules costing approximately $50 more than the average price for 2 horses, which was around $100 to $150 in the mid-1800s. These animals could cover more terrain compared to an oxen team, but required better quality feed and more water, which wasn't always readily available, particularly in the arid Southwest. Mules and oxen were known for their sure-footedness and were often preferred for traversing rugged and narrow terrain. The primary challenge was the rugged terrain, and the term path better describes the early routes used by the substantial freight wagons than calling them roads. These trails were fraught with obstacles, including rocks, washes, steep drop-offs, mud during rainy weather, landslides, dust, treacherous climbs, narrow one-way paths, and downhill descents that could overheat the brakes. Typically, the only form of road maintenance was continuous use, which frequently left the trail rutted. Today, reaching some of the abandoned towns and old mining camps that were once serviced by pioneer freight wagons often requires an all-terrain vehicle. Out of necessity, the wagons were constructed for endurance, durability, and carrying capacity. Their undercarriages were crafted from iron, while the beds and wheels were made of oak or other sturdy wood, While their dimensions varied, empty wagons weighed between 1 ton and the nearly 8,000 pounds of the massive 20-mule team borax wagons that operated in Death Valley. Depending on their size and purpose, freighters typically transported anywhere from 3 to over 30 tons of cargo. The substantial 20-mule team borax wagons operating in Death Valley were among the largest, measuring 16 feet in length, 4 feet in width, and 6 feet in depth. When fully loaded, they carried over 35 tons and had rear wheels standing 7 feet high. Their regular route extended from what is now the Furnace Creek Ranch area to the railhead at Mojave, covering approximately 160 miles through the desert. Typically, it was a 10-day journey. For overnight travel, teamsters needed to make arrangements to carry water for themselves and their animals, and possibly feed too. During extended trips in arid regions or areas with few streams, it was challenging to carry sufficient water. Hence, drivers had to plan stops at known springs and water holes. Crossing streams, particularly in the spring, demanded great caution since unseen rocks, deep spots, or eroded soft bottoms could pose issues for both the animals and wagons. Similarly, steep uphill grades often necessitated unhitching one team to help the other ascend, repeating the process for the other wagon. On one journey from Prescott to the Pima villages in Arizona, the driver waited several days for the Gila River to subside. When it didn't, he took matters into his own hands, constructing a makeshift raft. He then carefully unloaded the goods, pulled them across the river piecemeal, drove the team and wagon across, reloaded the cargo, and continued on his way. Freighters typically procured their loads from various sources. These included transporting ore from mines, receiving cargo from steamboats, picking up goods from larger towns and manufacturers, or collecting items from railroads delivering supplies to major western towns such as Denver and San Francisco. Freight transport was a thriving industry, and newspapers regularly reported on the arrival of freight shipments. For instance, the West Wind safely docked last evening, heavily laden with a substantial quantity of freight, including 2 crushers destined for the mine. The arrival of railroads not only spurred the growth of existing small towns, but also led to the establishment of new ones. There were numerous spur lines, particularly connecting to mining centers, facilitating the transportation of materials. This increased demand for supplies fueled fierce competition among freight companies. Military contracts were among the most coveted jobs. As forts multiplied, many located in remote areas, the Army required regular resupplying. This created a stable source of work and income, with Army contracts often spanning a year. It's challenging to comprehend the volume of departures and arrivals of large freight wagons. One newspaper reported that the city streets are constantly congested with large freight wagons. Just last week, 110 of them passed through, each one carrying an average load of 5,000 pounds. Large outfits typically secured major contracts requiring a string of wagons. It was not unusual to see a dozen or more wagons traveling in tandem. This formation was particularly effective on well-traveled roads. On rocky or narrow routes, a breakdown in one of the front wagons could spell significant trouble. Traveling in convoy offered protection and mutual assistance for the drivers. Weather conditions might cause delays, but they didn't deter the drivers when supplies were urgently needed or contracts were at stake. Larger freight wagons eventually fell victim to progress. The advent of trucks, the development of better road networks, and the expansion of rail service to smaller towns reduced the demand for the massive wagons. As motorized vehicles became more affordable, reliable, and abundant, many companies, mining operations, and businesses established their own fleets of trucks for transportation. Smaller, more manageable wagons continued to serve farms and deliver goods. But as road systems improved and extended to more remote locations, the large freighters became less visible and less essential. Trucking expanded and gradually displaced wagons, much like automobiles replaced stagecoaches and carriages. By 1910, there were still only about 10,000 trucks in the entire country. But by World War I, and certainly by 1920, the proliferation of paved roads and trucks revolutionized the freight industry. The speed and service enhancements provided by trucks made them the preferred choice for carrying a wide range of goods, from gasoline to hay. They were more cost-effective, quicker, more sanitary, and less cumbersome compared to wagons. Today, trucks come in various sizes to suit diverse needs and services, ranging from massive mining trucks like the Belosaurus, capable of carrying 450 tons at once, to small U.S. Postal Service trucks responsible for delivering your mail.